There have been a lot of important voices and issues that have been left out during this election cycle, and among them is that of migrant workers in Canada. Earlier this week, Martin chatted with Syed Hassan, an organizer and the executive director of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. He's also part of the secretariat of the Migrant Rights Network. Here's their conversation.
So, Hassan, Doug Ford, as a premier, has talked about taking care of our own first. Can you talk about his government's track record when it comes to the treatment of refugees and immigrants in Ontario?
So Doug Ford, as part of his elections campaign, actually back in 2018, was said this. He said, "We're going to take care of our own first." And I think the next 4 years has shown that he is very happy to use racist divisiveness as a way to pit migrant and immigrant communities against other poor and working class communities. And on the other end, just a few months ago, he said that we only want hardworking immigrants to come here, not those people who are on the dole, which again is about the fact that they have been chopping welfare, they've been chopping ODSP, but the message that's coming out that it's actually immigrants and migrants who are taking advantage. And this strategy to distract people away from who's really responsible, which is government and the corporate interests that they serve, are the ones who are really the ones that have made our lives miserable, and instead try to get people to turn on each other. His track record on migrant and immigrants has been incredibly damaging. So right at the onset, they chopped legal aid for refugees, making a big deal about the fact that refugees were taking over too many provincial services, trying to force the federal government to come in and fill that gap. And across the way, when we think about the things that low-wage working class people in Ontario, a lot of them are either new immigrants or they are migrants. And these are people in low wages, and those are people who lost the minimum wage increase because of the rollback of labor laws. These are the same people who have seen the healthcare cuts, who've seen the attacks on childcare, who've seen the attacks on housing. So the entire 4 years has been about damaging working class people's ability to protect themselves, to feed their families, and to take care of themselves. And multiple either rollbacks of existing laws or policies, such as the one on minimum wage, or new laws and policies have been created. For example, this massive expansion of police and prisons, which primarily impacts racialized people.
Let's talk about migrant workers, especially those employed on farms. We've been hearing about a number of deaths during the coronavirus. How have they fared under Doug Ford's government over the last 4 years?
I mean, COVID is a human rights catastrophe, right? So we've lost so many people, at least 3 people from COVID, another 6 during quarantine. And these are, people with families who effectively died, sometimes not being even able to say goodbye to their families back home. They didn't have access to phones. Uh, in some cases, for example, Romario Morgan, by the time his body arrived back in Jamaica, it was so decomposed that his own mother was not allowed to look at him. Other people who've passed away and not really been able to get any support from the government. Thousands of people on farms, thousands of migrants, racialized working class people fell sick, were infected. And the first thing that Doug Ford did is he blamed farm workers. He said that the problem was that they were not getting tested. Then he blamed undocumented farm workers, saying actually the employers are doing everything they can, but these aren't actually the migrant workers in the program. These are other undocumented people who are bringing sickness onto the farms. Then they try to force undocumented farm workers who are asymptomatic to keep working. And each of these moments we were able to organize and push back, and there was some, backstepping from the government in the light of migrant self-organizing. But at the same time, all migrants were able to organize, and in Ontario, it's one of the only provinces that more healthcare is available for undocumented people than anywhere else in the country. So while Ford and his, corporate interests and his entire government has not supported or defended or protected, but in fact blamed and criminalized migrants, migrant organizing has continued in this moment to be able to get, changes.
Hassan, you mentioned a little bit the pushback from movements. if the Conservatives, as the polls indicate, win another 4-year majority, what do you expect from them, and what do you think resistance to their agenda should look like?
I think the reality is that Ford was not able to implement his entire agenda because of COVID-19, and he was forced to be more pro-people than he wanted to be. But I think that in this turn away, when COVID is over, whatever that means, there is going to be a return of the agenda. And I think part of that agenda is going to be cuts to public services. It's going to be austerity because the government is in deficit and they're going to try to cut and cut and cut. And they've already indicated as much. We can see that this massive handouts to real estate developers, this construction of these highways through environmentally protected areas or environmentally needing to be protected areas is all coming to a head, where the actual agenda that he came to in power in 2018, he's going to really try to implement in 2022. And so I think it's about identifying particular sites of struggle. Right. So, for example, we can see that there are fights that are coming up in long-term care. There are fights that are coming up around environmental issues. There's going to be fights around the Ring of Fire. We're going to see these issues around further attacks on working conditions, which he was only able to roll back the Liberals. Now they're going to bring in their own laws. Right. So I think we are not very ready. So I think our fight back has to be very, very quickly trying to to build some power, and then identify key sites of struggle where campaigns can be made to defend communities. And I think that is going to require a level of coordination between the various sections of the labor movement, which includes non-unionized workers like ours, but also environmental movements, police violence movements. And I'm not so sure that will happen strategically. I hope that it will happen because we will be forced to do so because of the conditions that are presented to us. I think it's important to note that after 2018, when Ford was won, the time it took for the fight back to really get ready, there were some flashpoints, right? The city of Toronto rezoning of the municipal seats, for example. And that fight and that institutional capacity of building has been lost and has to be regained. So I think a sober analysis is one that leaves one with a lot of work ahead of us.
Well, Hassana, we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Maybe not the most optimistic assessment, but
I'm so sorry.
But definitely a lucid one. Definitely a lucid one. So thanks so much for speaking to us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.